Blue moon.
I'm no expert on horror movies, but I've always meant to see this one. An American Werewolf in London, directed by legendary filmmaker John Landis, who also made The Blues Brothers, one of my favorite musicals, and Animal House, one of the greatest comedies of all time. I was always putting off seeing this movie in favor of other stuff. But when I watched Hag Film's very positive review of the film, I realized that I ought to finally watch the film and be done with it. Unlike Landis' more well-known films, this is a mix between a comedy and a horror. Always a difficult combination, but if done well, it makes for classic filmmaking. The movie's plot would sound pretty straightforward enough. A man is bitten by a werewolf and turns into one himself. But John Landis plays merry hell with these ideas, mixing humor in between the scenes of horror and violence. Sure, we get the dark, ominous foreshadowing when the villagers turn the two American tourists away with warnings about the moon at the beginning of the film, and of course we get the attack, which is as shocking and gruesome as doubtless it was back in the day. And later on, we get a scene of the young man, David, turning into a werewolf and wreaking havoc in the dark London streets. But then John Landis adds a hilarious scene of him waking up the next morning naked in a zoo. We then watch as he tries to get home as fast as he can, and it's really funny what Landis decided to do here. I mean, being naked in public always has been a classic nightmare scenario, though the funny thing is David had had nightmares of being a wolfman, and those turned out to be true, along with this classic nightmare scenario as well. And the way he deals with it leads to some pretty amusing confrontations. Ultimately, this movie is a horror, but the comedy spliced in between the horror makes for a bizarre film that throws you off guard constantly. For example, there's a classic scene from any horror movie where the protagonist tries to stop himself going crazy and decides to get help. Landis takes this obligatory scene and injects comedy instead of the usual melodrama, leading to one of the best and funniest moments in the film. What really makes this film special, though, is the skill of the makeup and the transformation scenes. Even today, the transformation scenes hold up with any CGI horror fest they make nowadays. It's scary, brilliant, and yet even here there's room for a bit of comedy to offset the terrifying imagery. To achieve the awesome effects of the scene, John Landis hired Rick Baker to take care of the technical sides of the werewolf scenes, and it's amazing what they managed to do in this film. An American Werewolf in London was groundbreaking, considering that it was this movie that brought about an award for makeup in the Academy Awards, and more importantly, it was this movie that convinced Michael Jackson to hire John Landis to direct the music video to Thriller, which anyone out there will tell you is one of the most famous songs ever made. This movie is very unconventional for both comedies and horrors. It's an unconventional horror due to the massive use of comedy, and it's an unconventional comedy due to the thrilling plot, the dark undertones, as well as the genuinely scary scenes of a werewolf tearing people apart. The violence is definitely not for everybody to see, and there are some other questionable scenes that force me to warn people to follow the rating system in their respective countries. But that aside, this is a great movie that I wholeheartedly recommend. I was genuinely scared by some of the scenes in the movie, and other times I was just laughing. John Landis really knew what he was doing with this movie, and it takes a rare, talented filmmaker to splice comedy and horror so skillfully. Now, granted, this movie's got flaws, and as with many horror flicks, this movie's biggest flaws lie within the romance plot. But really, do you want me to talk about that part of the story? Is it really so important to a movie like this? It does an average job selling its point to us, thanks to both writing and acting, but ultimately this movie is a comedy horror, trying to either shock us or make us laugh, and sometimes both at the same time. By the time the movie's over, we've long forgiven this movie's flaws, because they're so easily outweighed by the brilliant aspects of the movie. I'm so glad that I took the time to see this for myself. Truly, it's a classic worth seeing.
You saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own.